He laughed when I told him I loved his son. A black woman like you? My son needs better. Those words crushed me, but 3 years later, that millionaire lost his fortune, his reputation, and his son, who chose me over everything his father offered. He laughed when I told him I loved his son. A black woman like you? My son needs better. Those words crushed me, but 3 years later, that millionaire lost his fortune, his reputation, and his son, who chose me over everything his father offered. I'm Jasmine, and this isn't just a love story, it's my testimony. 4 years ago, I was just a marketing executive in Chicago, dedicated to my career and not looking for anything serious. Then I met Michael at a charity gala. There was something about his smile, the way he listened when I spoke, like every word mattered. What I didn't know then was that his father owned half the buildings in the financial district, and that loving his son would become the fight of my life. The first time I walked into the Anderson estate, I felt small. Marble floors, artwork worth more than my annual salary, and judging eyes that followed me from room to room. I wasn't meant to belong there, at least that's what his father wanted me to believe. But sometimes, the people who try to break you end up breaking themselves instead. Stay with me as I share how love conquered hate and how choosing authenticity over money changed everything. This journey cost us both tears and pride, but showed us what real wealth looks like. And trust me, it's nothing you can put in a bank account. I still remember the night I met Michael, like it was yesterday. It was at the Chicago Children's Hospital fundraiser, an event I'd helped organize through my marketing firm. I wasn't even supposed to attend, but my boss caught the flu at the last minute. Sometimes fate works in mysterious ways. Michael stood out immediately, not because of his tailored suit or the way people gravitated toward him, but because of how he seemed slightly uncomfortable with the attention. While others networked aggressively, he quietly donated a substantial check and tried to slip away unnoticed. I caught him admiring a painting done by one of the hospital children, a simple watercolor of a family holding hands under a rainbow. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I said, stepping beside him. When he turned to look at me, something electric passed between us. We talked for hours that night, about everything except money. He never mentioned his family's wealth, and I appreciated that authenticity. He was just Michael, thoughtful, passionate about architecture, and surprisingly funny in a dry, unexpected way. Our first date was at a small Ethiopian restaurant on the South Side. My choice. He showed up in jeans and a simple button-down, no pretense. I watched him navigate eating with injera bread, laughing at his own clumsiness and asking thoughtful questions about the culture. That night, walking me to my apartment door, his kiss felt like coming home. For 3 months, we existed in our own bubble. Weekend hikes in Starved Rock State Park, impromptu picnics by Lake Michigan, arguing playfully over movie choices. He introduced me to his friends, other architects and artists who accepted me immediately. I introduced him to my close-knit family, who, after initial skepticism about this rich white boy, warmed to his genuine interest in their stories. Then came the text that changed everything. "My parents want to meet you. Dinner at their house this Saturday." I spent hours choosing the perfect outfit, professional but not stuffy, elegant but not trying too hard. Michael squeezed my hand as we pulled through the gates of his family estate. "They'll love you," he promised. "Just be yourself." If only I'd known what being myself would cost us both. The Anderson estate was everything you'd imagine. Sprawling grounds, a mansion with more windows than I could count, and a driveway lined with luxury cars that probably cost more than my entire education. Michael's mother greeted us with practiced politeness, her smile never quite reaching her eyes as she air-kissed my cheeks. But it was his father, Richard Anderson, who commanded the room when he entered. "So this is the woman who's been keeping you from your responsibilities," he said to Michael instead of greeting me directly. His eyes assessed me like I was a business acquisition rather than a person. During dinner, He questioned me about my family background, my education, my career, all while making subtle comments about Michael's ex-girlfriends, all of whom seemed to be daughters of business associates or politicians. The breaking point came after dinner, when Michael excused himself to take a call from a colleague about a project deadline. Richard offered to show me his art collection, to see if you have any taste, he said with a chuckle that felt like a slap. As we stood before a massive oil painting, he turned to me suddenly. "What exactly are your intentions with my son?" he asked, swirling his scotch. "I love him," I answered honestly. The words had never been spoken between Michael and me, but in that moment, I knew they were true. Richard laughed. Not a gentle laugh, but the kind that cuts. "A black woman like you? My son needs better. He needs someone who enhances our family legacy, not complicates it." He stepped closer. "Let me be clear. Michael stands to inherit everything I've built, but that's contingent on certain choices. I'm not a racist. I have black employees, but family is different. Michael will eventually see reason." I stood frozen, tears threatening, but pride keeping them at bay. When Michael returned, he found me composed but distant. I couldn't bring myself to repeat his father's words that night. I just said I wasn't feeling well. But something had shifted. A shadow had fallen across our perfect love story, and I wondered if we were strong enough to step back into the light. I didn't tell Michael what his father said for 3 whole days. I just couldn't find the words without breaking down. When I finally did, sitting on my small apartment balcony with the Chicago skyline glittering behind us, Michael's face transformed from confusion to rage to profound sadness. "I'll talk to him," he promised, pulling me close. "This isn't who we are as a family." But Richard Anderson was nothing if not strategic. The talk Michael had with him resulted in his father apologizing, not for what he believed, but for being too direct about it. Then the real campaign began. Michael started receiving unexpected job offers from firms in London, Tokyo, Singapore, all conveniently managed by Richard's business associates. His younger sister called regularly, telling him how their mother was worrying herself sick over his rebellion. The final blow came 6 months into our relationship. Michael was passed over for partnership at his architecture firm, a promotion he'd been promised, at a company where, coincidentally, Richard Anderson was a major investor. That night, Michael showed up at my place, defeated. "My father's trying to force my hand," he admitted, sinking onto my couch. "He's poisoning everything I've worked for." The pressure created invisible fractures between us. Michael became quiet, distracted. I caught him staring at his phone, contemplating calls from his family that he'd let go to voicemail. I started questioning everything. Was I selfish for staying with him? Was I destroying his relationship with his family, his career prospects? One night, after Michael fell asleep on my couch reviewing blueprints, his phone lit up with a text from his father. "The Weber position is still open. Paris, clean slate. Just end this phase and come back to reality." Standing in my tiny kitchen, I made tea with shaking hands and asked myself the hardest question. Did I love Michael enough to let him go? Would his life be better without the complications I brought? For the first time since we'd met, I wasn't sure if love was enough to withstand the storm of prejudice and privilege we were caught in. The turning point came on a rain-soaked Tuesday. I'd finally worked up the courage to end things, to set Michael free from the choice between me and his family legacy. I had the whole speech planned, how I loved him too much to watch him lose everything, how someday he'd thank me. But when I opened my apartment door to find him drenched from the storm, clutching a small blue box, the words evaporated. "I almost lost this in a puddle," he said, laughing nervously as he got down on one knee right there in my entryway, water dripping from his hair onto my welcome mat. "Jasmine, I've made my choice. It's you. It's always been you." The ring wasn't massive or flashy. He'd chosen it himself, without his family's money or connections. a simple sapphire that matched the color of the dress I'd worn when we first met. That night, wrapped in blankets with mugs of hot chocolate, we made a pact. We would build our own legacy, one that had nothing to do with the Anderson fortune. Michael transferred to a smaller firm, owned by one of his college friends. I watched him rediscover his passion for sustainable urban housing, projects his father had always dismissed as unprofitable. My family rallied around us, Sunday dinners becoming Michael's new normal. My father, initially the most skeptical, taught Michael how to fix the leaky faucet in my apartment, a rite of passage that meant more than any Anderson approval ever could. We created our own community of friends and allies. When word spread of Richard Anderson's ultimatum, colleagues I respected reached out with job opportunities and connections. My boss, a fierce woman who'd built her agency from nothing, became our unexpected champion, connecting us with clients who valued talent over pedigree. The hardest day was when Michael cleaned out his childhood bedroom, his mother watching silently from the doorway, unable to defy her husband, but unwilling to help him punish their son. "She'll come around," Michael said afterward, though I could see the pain in his eyes. "They both will, once they see what we're building together." Standing strong wasn't about fighting Richard Anderson. It was about proving him wrong with every choice we made. Every day we chose love over fear. No one saw Richard Anderson's collapse coming, least of all Richard himself. It started with whispers in the business community, then grew into headlines. The man who'd built an empire on calculating risks had made a catastrophic miscalculation. In his determination to teach Michael a lesson, Richard had pulled strings to blacklist him from major architecture firms in Chicago. What he didn't anticipate was that Michael's former colleagues would talk. When the story reached Architectural Digest, how the legendary Richard Anderson had sabotaged his own son's career over his choice of partner, the first crack appeared in his carefully constructed image. Meanwhile, Richard had become obsessed with ensuring Michael would come to his senses. He poured millions into a luxury development project in Miami that Michael had originally designed, only to scrap Michael's sustainable elements in favor of flashier, less practical features. When hurricane season hit and the development flooded due to ignored environmental assessments, investors began pulling out. Richard's company stock plummeted. The final blow came during a charity gala, ironically, the same annual event where Michael and I had met 2 years earlier. Richard, several drinks in, confronted us publicly. "You think you've won?" he snarled at me, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "You have no idea what our family name means in this city. He could have had everything." What Richard didn't realize was that a prominent black philanthropist, whose foundation had contributed millions to Anderson projects, was standing close enough to hear every word. Within a week, partnerships were dissolved, contracts cancelled. The recording of his tirade, captured by a shocked guest, circulated through Chicago's elite circles. The Anderson empire didn't collapse overnight, but it began a steady decline. Projects fell through, investors distanced themselves. Richard's business partners, many of whom had privately questioned his judgment for years, used the scandal as an opportunity to push him out of decision-making roles. I took no pleasure in watching the man who'd tried to destroy our relationship lose everything he valued. But there was a certain poetic justice in the fact that his own prejudice, the very thing he'd accused me of threatening, had been his undoing. The irony wasn't lost on Michael, who said quietly as we watched the news reports, "He never understood that real wealth isn't what you have, but who you choose to share it with." While Richard Anderson's empire crumbled, Michael and I built something neither of us had imagined possible. The small architecture firm where Michael found refuge became our launching pad. His designs for affordable, sustainable housing caught the attention of city planners looking to revitalize neglected neighborhoods. What began as one project in Bronzeville grew into a community initiative that combined beautiful spaces with practical needs. I leveraged my marketing skills to highlight not just the buildings, but the people who would live in them. We held community meetings, listened to residents' dreams and concerns, and adapted plans accordingly. My boss recognized the potential and created a new division within our agency focused on community-centered development, with me at the helm. Our professional success was meaningful, but it was our personal journey that transformed us. Planning our wedding became an act of intention. We chose vendors from communities often overlooked by the wedding industry. My mother's church, not some grand cathedral, hosted our ceremony. The Anderson side of the aisle was sparse, just Michael's sister and a few cousins brave enough to defy Richard, but the church overflowed with genuine well-wishers. The media caught wind of our story. A local magazine wanted to feature us, the architect and the marketer rebuilding Chicago. The interview focused not on Richard's rejection, but on our vision. Michael spoke passionately about design that serves people rather than status. I talked about amplifying voices from communities typically excluded from development conversations. What we built wasn't founded on millions inherited, but on principles earned through hardship. Our first home wasn't a mansion, but a renovated brownstone in a neighborhood Richard would never have visited. We filled it with art from local creators, furniture built by craftspeople we'd met through projects, and photographs documenting our journey. The sweetest moment came when our first major project won a prestigious design award. Standing on that stage with Michael, I remembered Richard's dismissive laugh when I'd said I loved his son. How little he understood that love, real love, doesn't diminish in the face of obstacles. It expands, strengthens, and ultimately creates something more valuable than anything that can be inherited. As Michael often says now, my father wanted me to build monuments to wealth. Instead, I'm building foundations for community. Our rise wasn't measured in dollars, but in the lives we touched and the spaces we transformed. That's a legacy worth building. 3 years after the confrontation that changed everything, I opened my office door to find Richard Anderson standing there, diminished somehow, the commanding presence now uncertain. After his company's collapse, he'd vanished from public life. Now he stood before me, holding his designer hat like a shield. "May I speak with you?" he asked, his voice lacking its former authority. "Please." That please, so small, so difficult for him, told me everything. I gestured to a chair, watching him struggle to find words that had once come so easily. "I was wrong," he finally said, eyes fixed on the awards displayed on my wall. "Our projects, our impact. About everything. About you." The apology wasn't eloquent or perfect. It came in halting sentences, admissions of pride and prejudice that had cost him not just his fortune but his son. He'd spent months in therapy, he told me, confronting biases he'd never acknowledged. His wife had finally left him, tired of living with a man whose values had poisoned their family. "I'd like to see Michael," he said, "if he's willing." I called Michael that evening, relaying the conversation without judgment. The silence on the other end stretched long before he spoke. "Do you think he's sincere?" he asked. "I think he's broken," I answered honestly. "Whether that's the same as sincere, only time will tell." The reunion happened at our home, neutral territory that represented everything we'd built without him. Richard sat awkwardly on our couch, taking in the photographs of our lives that had continued without him. Our wedding, community events, construction sites, where we stood proudly in hard hats. Michael set clear boundaries. Reconciliation would be gradual, conditional on continued growth. Richard wouldn't be immediately welcomed back as Dad. That title needed to be re-earned through consistent respect and effort. The most powerful moment came when Richard met my family at a Sunday dinner. My father, never one to mince words, looked him straight in the eye. "You nearly destroyed something beautiful because you couldn't see past color," he said. "You've got a lot to learn about what makes a family strong." Richard nodded, humbled. "I'm trying to learn," he replied, the words clearly unfamiliar on his tongue. The reconciliation remains a work in progress, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. But watching Richard Anderson struggle to unlearn a lifetime of privilege and prejudice has taught me something profound about humanity's capacity for change, however painful and imperfect. Today, 5 years after that fateful dinner at the Anderson estate, life looks nothing like I imagined. It's better. Michael and I live in a renovated, historic building in Pilsen, a vibrant neighborhood filled with art and culture. Our architecture and community development firm, Anderson Williams Collective, has become known for projects that genuinely transform neighborhoods without displacing original residents. Last month, we broke ground on our biggest project yet, an affordable housing complex with integrated green spaces, a community center, and a business incubator for local entrepreneurs. The journey to this point wasn't smooth. Richard's attempt at reconciliation has been a winding road. Some days he's the changed man he claims to be, volunteering at community centers in neighborhoods he once avoided, listening more than speaking. Other days, old habits emerge in subtle comments that remind us how deeply ingrained prejudice can be. But he's trying, and that effort matters. The greatest surprise came 2 years ago when I discovered I was pregnant. Holding our daughter, Zora, named after Zora Neale Hurston, my literary hero. I sometimes catch Richard watching her with a mixture of wonder and regret. She'll never know the wealth and privilege he once thought essential, but she's surrounded by something far more valuable, a community that celebrates her existence rather than questioning it. My relationship with Michael has deepened in ways I never anticipated. Weathering that storm together revealed our true strength. We disagree, we compromise, we build consensus, skills forged in the crucible of standing up to his family. We've learned that love isn't just about grand gestures or declarations. It's about showing up every day, choosing each other repeatedly through challenges and celebrations alike. I still occasionally run into people who know me only as the woman who brought down Richard Anderson. They don't see that his downfall was self-inflicted, the natural consequence of valuing the wrong things. More importantly, they miss that our story isn't about destruction, but creation, of a life, a family, and a legacy built on authenticity rather than appearance. Michael says it best. My father thought he was protecting our family legacy, but you and we're creating one worth protecting. Looking at our daughter, our home, our community, and the love we've fought for, I know with absolute certainty that we've built something far more valuable than what we lost. Looking back on this journey, I'm struck not by how much was lost, but by how much was gained. When a millionaire mocked my love and tried to erase me from his son's future, he couldn't see that some things can't be bought or controlled. Real love, the kind that sustains you through storms, isn't about status or approval or inheritance. It's about choosing each other, day after day, especially when that choice comes with a cost. I often think about that first confrontation with Richard, when he looked at me and saw only the color of my skin, not the capacity of my heart. How limited his vision was. How much he missed by reducing people to categories and stereotypes. The wealth he accumulated over decades couldn't buy him the wisdom to see beyond his prejudice until it was almost too late. For those of you facing your own versions of this story, whether it's parents who disapprove, communities that judge, or systems that try to keep you in your place, hear me clearly. You are worthy of love. Your feelings aren't diminished by someone else's inability to understand them. And sometimes, standing firm in your truth is the greatest gift you can give, not just to yourself, but to those who oppose you. Richard Anderson needed to lose everything to find his humanity. I hope your opposition finds theirs without such a costly lesson. Michael and I aren't perfect. Our life isn't a fairy tale. We argue about dishwasher loading and work schedules like any couple. But beneath those everyday frictions lies an unshakable foundation. We chose each other when it would have been easier not to. We built something meaningful from the rubble of rejection. Love doesn't see color or bank accounts. It doesn't calculate status or yield to intimidation. It simply persists, sometimes quietly, sometimes defiantly, but always authentically. If my story touched you, subscribe to hear more real stories of triumph over prejudice. Share this with someone who needs to know that choosing love is always worth it, even when that choice costs everything that once seemed important. Because what you'll gain in return, that's the real wealth, and nobody can take it from you.